Let's talk about the Rogue Prince of Persia, the new roguelike from developers Evil Empire. I was able to acquire a key for a short preview of the game, and my impressions are really positive. The biggest takeaway for myself is that the game is fluid, combat is fast, traversal is fantastic, and I did not experience any issues while making my first run through the game. Areas are set up to allow the player to combine traversal mechanics to get the drop on enemies, and allow the player to flee if they don't feel like fighting. To be this capable early on has me wondering how enemies will scale as runs progress. When it comes to combat, there are a number of weapons to find throughout your runs. Primary weapons include twin daggers, a spear, an axe, a broadsword, and a royal sword. Each of these weapons have a charge-up attack, and I think the royal sword is the best in terms of speed and damage. The axe, however, was my favorite. One swing will destroy most shields and can do big damage regardless of the enemy type. If you are thorough during your run, you might find a blacksmith who will upgrade your weapons. This will not only boost damage, but can provide useful status effects, which will help when you are surrounded. You'll also have the use of tools, which pretty much act as secondary weapons, and these have a rechargeable gauge so that you don't spam these attacks. Now, if you could spam, this game would become really trivial. The bow by itself, and this is the starter tool for the game, it does so much damage and has so much versatility because when you hit enemies, not only do you have a high chance of killing them, you could also mark them. And on top of that, it has knockback. So if you knock an enemy off a ledge or multiple enemies off a ledge or into each other, you could potentially kill an entire row of enemies, no problem. So it's good that you're not allowed to spam, that there is some type of balance there. The other tools include the chakram, the stealth assault, which is a throwable dagger, a gauntlet dropped by the first boss, which ends up using almost all of your gauge and also does this really widespread AoE attack. It's really fun to use, has a really cool slowdown, but it just takes a long time to build up. And a grappling hook, which can just drag enemies to you and stun them. My personal favorite is the stealth assault because you teleport to the dagger, which is not only awesome and stylish, but really useful in traversal. Like I said, if you're looking for consistency when it comes to damage, the bow is where it's at. As you find different chests or come across shrines, you will find upgrades to these tools. So you can go ahead and just run around and explore, and eventually you may come across a weapon that you may want to experiment with or something that's going to fit your playstyle. Now, in addition to the basic and charge attacks, the prince is also able to strike the ground while diving and also has the ability to kick. If you kick an enemy, it will knock them backwards, and if they kick them into another enemy, it will stun them. If you also happen to kick them into another surface, like a wall, it'll stun them as well. And you can also kick enemies off platforms, and that is a ton of fun. I was kind of confused, though, as to how high up an enemy needed to be to kill them, because some drops felt like they shouldn't do a lot of damage, but I did see a number of times where I kicked an enemy off, they took a short drop and just insta-killed them, which I'm not complaining about. Keep that feature in. It is a lot of fun. As you make your way through your runs, you're eventually going to start finding runes that are going to provide a number of status effects and buffs for the player. This includes, and is not limited to, I didn't get through all of them, but you can light enemies on fire, you can poison them, you can mark them to do increased damage, so on and so forth. There's a lot there. Runes can be upgraded as you progress. There are 4 slots to tinker with. And I'm just going to say that really surprised me because to kind of go through some of these roguelikes, usually you'll find a number of different upgrades in a stage, and then it just kind of progresses as you go along. But here, in the first stage alone, you might be able to find 4 runes that will make you incredibly powerful and make the rest of this run really easy because you can also upgrade these abilities as well. I also like the fact that there are runes that will upgrade your dodge and dive attack. This adds extra incentive to get up close and personal to ensure you are doing maximum damage. One of my favorite runes is the ability to dodge over an enemy and then hit them with daggers as you're dodging over them. It's great for breaking shields, it's great for doing damage, it's great for knockdowns and stuns. It's one of my favorite things to do. I also like the fact that the dive attack, you actually hit them with your sword before you actually hit them with a dive attack, which is kind of insane because the dive attack is one of the most useful abilities early on. It does a ton of damage, has a nice little AoE to it. I'm kind of surprised that there's this much variety and versatility that early on, especially in the first biome, because in the second one, you're pretty much just trying to build up your kit to ensure that you are constantly doing consistent high damage. Now, because you're so capable, and because I mentioned before that traversal can act as a means to escape, you're probably asking yourself, how difficult are the enemies? I'm going to say that they're threatening, but that's solely because of the damage output. You start out with 1,000 health, but pay that no mind. If an enemy gets a clean shot on you, your health bar will melt fairly quickly. The second biome features more diversity in terms of enemy variety, and the archers that can be found there can do a ton of damage if they connect with their arrows. So if you're trying to get cute with them, letting them attack you, you can dodge projectiles pretty easily. If you let them hit you, you're going to see a huge chunk of your life go away. So it's recommended that you get comfortable with traversal mechanics early on so that you can get up close, dodge over them, climb over them, get your attacks in, and then move on, because that will make all of these encounters a lot easier. Now, the enemies that are shielded pose the biggest threat because depending on the weapon or tool that you're using, it may take a number of hits to break that shield. There are runes, however, that you may find that will do shield breaks pretty quickly. And you have to also keep in mind that most enemies in this game, that at least I found, they do not stagger, which is why it is recommended that you utilize your kick to maintain your distance and potentially stun the enemy. I was kind of surprised about how tanky some of these enemies were. You'll get 2 shots in, but they're still winding up their swing. And by the time you are trying to dodge, you've more than likely been hit and you're taking a lot of damage. So just make sure you use that kick as often as possible. Now, maintaining your distance is recommended early on before your weapons have status effects. Once you have acquired certain buffs, I'm not saying throw caution to the wind, but feel free to mix it up as you see fit, because you can become a demon pretty quickly and enemies will get melted. And I'm talking scores of enemies, because it's really funny how once an enemy catches onto you, they will literally climb from where they are to get to you. And if you group them all up, hit a couple dive attacks, get a couple charge attacks, you might see yourself killing all of them fairly quickly, especially if you have the marked ability or you have something that can burn them. It is really impressive about how dangerous you are early on. The preview for the Rogue Prince of Persia has 2 biomes and a boss arena, and I want to say it was pretty easy on my first try to get there. Although if you do happen to get to that boss, you'll more than likely not have any upgrades to really help you during the fight. But I also think that if I had played more patiently, I would have beat them on my first try. But I was really careless and was just trying to trade blows, which did not work at all. But afterward, once I got into my second run, third run, fourth run, I had no issues at all. The boss has really easy tells, and the right combination of runes can do a ton of damage. Also, certain weapons, like the Royal Sword and Spear, have high damaging combos, and this will carry you to the second phase pretty quickly. The one thing that stood out with this boss fight was that the game wants you to utilize your traversal abilities to maneuver around the boss's attacks so you can move in to get quick follow-ups. I love this feature, and I'm hoping that this is something that is utilized in every fight moving forward, because I was having a fun time with this. Upon completing the boss, you get a nice loot drop, but that doesn't matter because you get brought back to the beginning of the game. So, when you first return to the beginning after a death or the completion of a run, you're going to notice there's an area to craft weapons, runes, and tools. While I was able to spend currency for those upgrades, I was not able to access them, and this is something I assume is just a function of the preview. The currency you utilize is known as Spirit Glimmer, and this is obtained either by defeating enemies or exploring. As this is a roguelite, if you happen to die with that currency, you will lose it, but there are altars that you can find in each level that will allow you to send your glimmer back to camp so that you can use it later for upgrades. Well, I believe combat is solid, and I think you're given a fairly diverse kit. I had the most fun when I was exploring. There are actually a number of different challenge rooms dedicated strictly to platforming, and I'm pretty sure that's going to take some people by surprise. These are engaging, and tense because as this is a roguelike, your HP is always something you want to keep in mind. While the damage incurred by traps is low, if you aren't comfortable with the traversal mechanics, you might find yourself low on health quickly. I did have a couple of issues at times when I was trying to get through some of these really tight areas because I would hit a spike, and I wonder if the hit registration or the hit boxes on some of these traps are going to get altered and fixed because some of the windows were a bit too tight, especially if you were side by side with something and you're just trying to wall run. You have a little bit of lift, and I ended up taking damage anyway, and I'm hoping that kind of gets fixed during the early access period. In the most punishing roguelikes, losing a lot of health would be a problem, but in the Rogue Prince of Persia, you do have a multitude of options as it relates to healing. You do have one health consumable to start, and I assume that this is something that can be upgraded as you progress through the game. You also heal when you reach fast travel points, which are conveniently placed through the map. Yes, in case you want to actually fully explore a map, there are fast travel points everywhere, and it makes it really feel like a Metroidvania, which I think is pretty awesome. There are also vendors that will provide healing, and on top of that, once you reach a new area, you can heal via a fountain, and this will also replenish your consumable as well. While this doesn't mean you can play recklessly, it does allow the player to get comfortable with the various mechanics found here, which is something I think we can all appreciate. You might feel a bit overwhelmed at first because most roguelikes that I've played don't allow this type of freedom when it comes to traversal, especially when it blends in fairly seamlessly with the combat. But the moment everything clicks, this game is a lot of fun to play, and it really feels like Evil Empire has something special on their hands. The challenge rooms overall are interesting. The first one I ran into was fairly straightforward. You're jumping onto different platforms, running up walls, dodging saw blades, and really trying not to fall into pits and traps so that you don't die or take too much damage. The second biome featured a number of challenge rooms that had switches that needed to be flipped in a specific order so that you could progress. There was actually puzzles here, which was kind of surprising and really kind of took me back to like, this might be really old school Prince of Persia here. And I really like that because when you get into the second biome, those challenge rooms really showcased how fluid traversal can be. You actually had options in regard to your pathing, and I was impressed by how well everything fit together. It's clear that the developers wanted platforming to remain a core pillar of this game as it is a staple of the Prince of Persia franchise. I'm actually looking forward to seeing what the developers come up with next because this was a lot of fun. I'm also hoping, it's just wishful thinking, that traversal mechanics get added because, it'd be kind of cool if I could double jump or, have a second dash or something like that. But what's here right now is more than enough to satisfy even the most hardcore platforming fans. You're already really capable. It's probably just selfish of me to ask for more, but hear me out. It would be kind of cool if we could teleport or stop time. Just throwing it out there. At the end of each of these rooms is a chest that will house a permanent unlock. So if you are wondering if they're worth your time, they totally are because these are weapons, runes, tools, all that stuff that you can craft, and you'll see them come up more frequently in your runs, and it will help you navigate these areas better. So yes, these challenge rooms are well worth your time. While the preview itself was short, it did not take long for the Rogue Prince of Persia to make a good impression. This game has a lot of potential, and it will be interesting to see what gets added and tweaked as the game grows. I think it's well worth checking out, and if you're worried about difficulty, I think it's a little bit on the easier side. At least that's the way I felt after the first few levels. Who knows how the difficulty ramps up as you become more capable, but I feel like you have more than enough tools at your disposal to take on any challenge. Traversal does take a little bit of time to get used to, but once it clicks, as I said before, it's a lot of fun, and I think it's the best feature of the game. Who would have guessed that we would be getting 2 Prince of Persia games in 1 year by different developers, and both show a ton of promise for the franchise moving forward. Now, if only Ubisoft could bring that same effort and care for Splinter Cell. One can dream, though. And that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.